Welcome back, everyone. We have a lot to talk about in this video, so let's get right to it. Not too long ago, I posted a video called Muhammad and Merkava Mysticism, and it was just an overview, just a high-level view of how Jewish mystical beliefs and practices influenced the early Muslims. And since then, we've produced several more videos that trace some of these beliefs right into the Islamic texts, into the Hadith, and even into the Quran itself. But in this video, we're going to go well beyond that. And we're going to show that Muhammad himself was a mystic. Indeed, mystic practices were the primary methods that Muhammad used to receive his allegedly divine revelations. We'll begin by introducing you to a young boy. His name was Ibn Sayyad. Ibn Sayyad was a young Jewish boy, a contemporary of Muhammad in Medina. He later converted to Islam after Muhammad's death, according to Islamic sources, and died around 683. There's a very interesting encounter between Muhammad and Ibn Sayyad, and we're going to look at some of those major elements before we analyze the story itself. When Allah's messenger entered the garden, I have some of these elements in bold that are going to be very, very important. He entered the garden, he started hiding behind the trunks of date palms, and he's trying to hear something that Ibn Sayyad would say before Ibn Sayyad would actually see Muhammad sneaking up on him. He was lying on a bed covered with a velvet sheet, very, very important, from where his murmurs were heard. And at that point, the boy's mother saw Muhammad and shouted out to Ibn Sayyad that Muhammad was sneaking up on him. Of course, by now, you know how oral tradition works. This one story will occur in numerous different places, and the form of the story will be the same with some differences in the details. And these details are absolutely fascinating. Muhammad questions Ibn Sayyad, "Do you bear testimony to the fact that I am the messenger of Allah?" And Ibn Sayyad replies, "Do you bear testimony to the fact that I am the messenger of Allah?" Muhammad then gives a rather indecisive response. "I affirm my faith in Allah and in His angels and in His books. And what do you see?" He said, "I see the throne over water." If you've watched the previous videos on Jewish mysticism, you just saw this throne and kind of a vision scene, and you know exactly what's going on. If not, don't worry, you will very soon. Let's look at some other details. Muhammad asked him, "What dreams do you have?" So Muhammad is probing this boy's knowledge. Muhammad also said, "I am concealing something from you." Ibn Sayyad replied, "It is just smoke." So just to recap, we have a young Jewish boy lying under a blanket, murmuring to himself in a grove of trees, and a vision of a throne, and Muhammad asking him about smoke. Everything's making sense, right? It will very soon. Before we get into a description of what's actually going on here, I want to draw attention to one more very interesting element. We alluded to this earlier. Let's go back over it. Ibn Sayyad asked the Prophet, "Do you testify that I am the apostle of Allah?" The Prophet said to him, "I believe in Allah and His apostles." Now, what's fascinating here is Muhammad's indecisiveness. Basically, he and Ibn Sayyad challenge each other. Muhammad says, "Do you testify that I'm an apostle of Allah?" And Ibn Sayyad returns the challenge, returns the question, "Do you testify that I'm an apostle of Allah?" And Muhammad's responses are mediocre. He really doesn't go one way or the other. He apparently doesn't know what to think of Ibn Sayyad, and we'll talk about why that is towards the end of this video. But right now, I want to highlight the contrast between Muhammad's indecisiveness with Ibn Sayyad and the way Muhammad acted towards other competing apostles. Musaylama had written to Muhammad from Musaylama the apostle of God to Muhammad the apostle of God. So clearly this person's claiming to be an apostle. Muhammad questioned the messengers who brought the letter. "What do you say about it?" The messengers agreed with Musaylama, and Muhammad pleasantly responds, "Were it not that heralds are not to be killed, I would behead the pair of you." Muhammad wrote back to Musaylama, "From Muhammad the apostle of God to Musaylama the liar." Let's go through a couple of other traditions in the Hadith that talk about this, because I think Muhammad's indecisiveness is very important to focus on as we go through this story. In this particular case, Muhammad gives the typical indecisive response. He just says, "I believe in Allah and His messengers." And here in Bukhari, when Ibn Sayyad challenges Muhammad, Muhammad replies, I believe in Allah and his apostles. And in this version in Sahih Muslim, Ibn Sayyad asks Muhammad the same question. Do you bear witness to the fact that I'm a messenger of Allah? Allah's messenger rejected this and said, I affirm my faith in Allah and his messengers. So these are the types of elements that look like later additions, because Muhammad clearly gives an indecisive answer. Yet there's this detail added in some of these traditions that Muhammad rejected this. And so it's as if the hadith authors, compilers, are wanting to save Muhammad the embarrassment of looking indecisive, but he clearly is. Now we're going to look at some additional details that are going to sort of probe the mystical side of things, because Muhammad himself probes the mystical knowledge of the young Ibn Sayyad. We saw earlier that Ibn Sayyad referred to a throne over water. And we also saw that Muhammad said, I am concealing something from you. Ibn Sayyad said, it is just smoke. So why this curious talk of smoke and a throne over water? Let's get some help from David Halperin, who published an article in the Journal of the American Oriental Society. The expression used by Muhammad in his challenge appears in a slightly fuller form in the story of Hind bint Utbah. It is used to test the clairvoyant powers of a kahin. I have concealed something for you that I may test you. See what it is. This word kahin refers to a diviner. And if you wanted to test the knowledge of a mystic, you would conceal something. In this case, it's referring to Muhammad concealing a verse from the Quran in his mind. And so he conceals it in his mind and then asks Ibn Sayyad to tell him what he's thinking, in order to probe the supernatural knowledge of this young mystic. Now, the mystical connections become even more explicit. I mentioned this before. Ibn Sayyad said, I see the throne over water. And then Muhammad said, you see the throne of Iblis upon the water. As I said before, when you're hearing talk about visions of thrones, you need to be thinking Merkava mysticism. David Halperin refers to Ibn Sayyad when he says, I see a throne upon the sea, and then around it, al-Hayat. Now, why does that matter? Well, this word Hayat actually strengthens the connection to Merkava mysticism even more. This text is a priori the less likely to have suffered modifications and should be given preference. We are therefore to retain the surrounding Hayat. This point is crucial, for the word, evidently deleted as meaningless at a later stage of the transmission, is to be explained as an Arabicized form of the Hebrew Hayot, or living creatures. So these visions where these living creatures are bearing up the throne is actually the namesake of Merkava mysticism itself. As a side note, this makes it all the way into the Quran. Those who bear the throne and all who are about it. So go do a translation comparison and you'll see that some translators add angels, those angels who bear the throne. But don't let them fool you. This isn't just a casual reference to some angels carrying a throne. This is Merkava mysticism. Back to Ibn Sayyad. We are clearly dealing with an authentic report of a vision whose background is to be found in the Jewish Merkava mysticism. Now, do you remember when I said all of the details in this story are important? Where was the boy? Do you remember? He was in a garden. He was in a palm grove. When Allah's messenger entered the garden, he started hiding behind the trunks of the date palms, intending to hear something from Ibn Sayyad. So there's nothing to see here, right? It's just a casual reference to a garden with some date palms. No, it's a lot more than that. From the Talmud, there's a man named Yohanan ben Zakkai, and he was known for studying laws and lore, the speech of ministering angels, the speech of spirits, the speech of palm trees, Fuller's parables and Fox fables, great matters and small matters. So right here in the Talmud, the speech of palm trees, it's associated with mysticism. Even the setting that the little boy is in, Ibn Sayyad, even the setting in the garden with the palm trees speaks of mysticism. This phrase right here, great matters, these couple of words, this is actually referring to mysticism as well, and I found an online source that attests to this, which was rather surprising. Great meaning Merkava, mystical speculation. So you have the greater forms of learning, the mystical side of things, and then the lesser forms referring to the teaching of other rabbis. So even this little detail about the garden and the palm grove, something you can just read right over, is actually speaking explicitly of a Jewish mystical setting. Let's summarize some of the elements that we've covered so far. We talked about a palm grove, smoke, dreams, vision, a trance-like state. The little boy was murmuring to himself, and he was covered in a blanket, and of course, the throne scene. But we haven't talked much about Ibn Sayyad, how he was murmuring to himself or lying underneath a sheet. We'll save the best for last. Let's talk about that now. Ibn Sayyad is apparently either in a trance state or in the process of entering one. He is wrapped in a cloak and making low and unintelligible noises. Both features can be found in Arabian mantic practice, mantic referring to divination. Prophets and kahins, there's that word again, including Muhammad himself, received revelation wrapped in a mantle. So Ibn Sayyad's methods of divination were the same as Muhammad's. Allah's messenger used to bear the revelation with great trouble and used to move his lips quickly with inspiration. Ibn Sayyad would cover himself with a blanket. Muhammad, in the same way, wrapped me in blankets. And then Allah revealed the following holy verses of the Quran. O you, Muhammad, wrapped up in garments, arise and warn. Muhammad would enter a trance-like state as well. Sometimes it's revealed like the ringing of a bell. Then this state passes off after I have grasped what is inspired. And Aisha added that Muhammad would sometimes sweat on a very cold day, and she would notice the sweat dropping from his forehead. So we see that Muhammad's methods of divination paralleled precisely those of his contemporary mystic friend Ibn Sayyad. Are there more parallels between Muhammad and Jewish mysticism? Absolutely. Do you remember the passage in the Talmud that we read? The speech of angels and the speech of spirits and the speech of palm trees. Did trees talk to Muhammad? Yes, they did. Who informed the Prophet about the jinns at night when they heard the Quran? Your father Abdullah informed me that a tree informed the Prophet about them. The Prophet used to stand by a stem of a date palm tree while delivering a sermon. When the pulpit was placed for him, we heard that stem crying like a pregnant she-camel till the Prophet got down from the pulpit and placed his hand over it. So Muhammad could talk to and silence the trees. And of course, there are numerous other hadith that talk about rocks and mountains and trees greeting Muhammad. So let's go back to our summary. So we've seen an explicit connection between the palm grove setting and Jewish mysticism, the speech of palm trees we read in the Talmud. Of course, the trees talked to Muhammad, and Muhammad knew where to find this boy. This is a typical setting to practice divination. We talked about smoke and how this is very puzzling at first when Muhammad says, I'm concealing something from you, and the boy says it is just smoke. But Muhammad was actually testing the clairvoyant powers of the young mystic. Of course, the dreams, vision, the throne scene, the trance-like state, these are all very similar, and we saw parallels there with Muhammad, of course, and Muhammad moved his lips with inspiration, and Ibn Sayyad, of course, murmured to himself underneath the blanket. And we saw that Muhammad and Ibn Sayyad both wrapped themselves in a blanket while they were practicing divination. When Muhammad encountered contemporaries who claimed falsely, in his view, to be apostles, his condemnation was swift and decisive. Not so with the young Ibn Sayyad. Here, in this case, Muhammad came toe-to-toe with another mystic who used the same methods of divination that he did, and he didn't know what to think about it. I hope this video has helped explain some of what would otherwise be rather puzzling details in this story, and I hope this video has helped you see how mixed up Muhammad was in mysticism. So much so that some of the canonical hadith collections clearly portray Muhammad as a mystic himself. Thanks for watching.